For the first time in 9 years, there will be no French side in the semi-final stages of the UEFA Women's Champions League. However, this edition is the first time that we see two English teams move past the quarter-final stages together. So, let's talk about it. Now, before we dig deep into everything, let's establish one thing. This was extremely fun. When the draw took place and the ties were revealed, it was one of those ties that you really genuinely didn't know which team was going to make it into the semi-final stages, purely because there hasn't been a single team that hasn't struggled with injuries or hasn't had, the easiest ride in their league or the easiest ride this Champions League. So it was very much so that every single team had their own obstacles, and the conversation was more so you've got these brilliant teams that have had their hiccups throughout the way, and it was almost which team is going to show up on their better day and be able to have a great day at the office. And that is exactly how we've ended up with Arsenal, Chelsea, Wolfsburg, and Barcelona as our four final teams going into the semi-final stage. Arsenal making it into the semi-final stage for the first time since the 2012-2013 edition, so that's almost a decade since they've made it into the semi-final. We'll be trying to make it into the final for the first time since 2007. However, in front of them stands Wolfsburg, a team who knocked them out last year in the quarterfinal stages, and they're also a team that they've never beaten competitively. Barcelona will meet Chelsea, and if you remember these two last facing off, it was the final 2 years ago where Barcelona dominated the English side, winning 4-0 in the final, capturing their first ever Champions League. Chelsea will be seeking revenge across the two legs, where Barcelona are trying to make it into the third consecutive final appearance. Plenty on the line, but how did they get there? Let's start things off with Arsenal and Bayern, since they kicked things off for us in the quarterfinals. It was Bayern who were able to win that first leg at home with a Leah Schuler header. However, in the second leg at home for Arsenal, they were able to make up for the aggregate and ultimately move away as the winners. This game was majorly going to be won in the midfield. Ultimately, the conversation was going to be whichever team had a better day in the midfield was going to be the team to walk away with the dub. That first leg was a game of two halves. It was ultimately Bayern winning those duels in the middle. They were playing a little bit more compact than Arsenal were, and their press were able to be exposed a lot better than Arsenal were doing in the second half. It was a Leah Schuler header that put Bayern up in that first half, a very, very great, strong header, classic Leah Schuler style. You can definitely make the argument for Manuel Enzensberger being positioned in a slightly better manner. However, the ball did come from a very tight angle, and it looked like Schuler was able to generate a ton of power behind it. So really, the way she directed it, the amount of power that she put in, it was going to be a hard save regardless of where Enzensberger was really positioned. It was the second half, however, that Arsenal was a little bit more aggressive in their press. They were able to put more passes together and ultimately have some good runs forward, specifically getting Caitlin Ford involved, who has been on absolute fire lately. There's some very close calls, close shots. However, it was courageous and really great defending from Bayern to not allow them to score. The second leg, however, was where Arsenal were really able to shine. There has been a lot of talk about Arsenal's forward depth, or specifically that striker positional depth. At the start of the season, or particularly some of the start games at the Champions League, it looked like Arsenal were maybe more so struggling to heavily rely on Stina Blackstenius finishing those chances and being the clinical striker that we know that she is when you watch her play for Sweden. And ultimately, looking at their injury list, you needed those players to step it up. You needed Stina Blackstenius to get into the Stina Blackstenius that we know from the Euros or we know from the World Cup. I mean, you watch her international appearances. They're super, super great. She's an absolute beast on the ball. She's so aggressive. She's so strong. And she's a very clinical finisher. Started the season, that was maybe a worry, but you do really have to applaud her over the last month or so, or even 2 months, I would say. She's really stepped it up. I mean, she has scored some really crucial goals for Arsenal. Only the goal that she scored was the winner and was the goal that took Arsenal into the semi-final. In fact, I'd argue every single player on that pitch stepped it up. They needed to step it up. Not only were you coming on a deficit, but you're also coming up against Bayern, a team that is deadly on the counter-attack. They're super aggressive in the midfield, and like you saw in that first game, they're really good at defending, right? They're compact, and even when you are getting closer, and even when you are kind of moving into the box, they can flood the box with a lot of bodies and make it very frustrating to get a goal in, right? Losing Kim Little in the first 10 minutes, you'd think it would shake up the team a little bit. Ultimately, that's your leader. That's the player who's had the most amount of Champions League performances for you. She's always an important role of how Arsenal play, and really they needed to shift some things. Leah Williamson came in, who I thought had an incredible game, really, really aggressive, and more so than not, very involved up front. Because primarily she does play in the center back position, we have seen her shift it up, and when injuries do take in place, she goes into the midfield area. But But I do think it's very interesting to see a player who's primarily a defender get into the midfield and step into the midfield kind of slightly in a higher role, but do so in a very attacking manner. Plenty of sequences. Not only would she be involved in the build-up game at a higher area in the pitch, but she would be the one in that box trying to receive the ball. She would be the one slightly behind those attacking players trying to get the ball back into them. And so Leah Williamson, for me, did a great job in shifting into that midfield, but doing so in a very attacking manner, because ultimately you had to score that game, right? For Bayern, essentially, if they were able to keep a clean sheet and defend for the entirety of the game, they would still go through. So for them, they didn't necessarily have to play, the crazy attacking football. But for Arsenal, they needed to score those goals. Caitlin Ford and Palova were very aggressive on the sides. I thought they had some really great duels. Bayern's fullbacks were not having a great time. In fact, there was even points in that first half that you saw Stanway slip into that left back position to help stabilize that flank, which Arsenal were really attacking, clearly noticing that's a weakness they can go after. So the flank stood very great. They overloaded it. Stina moving around, finding some good spaces, good patches, and the whole team looked like they were really in sync. Sydney Lohman, who did not start the game, she did come on slightly at the end. It was later revealed that she is battling with somewhat of an injury and had to manage her minutes. I think that for Bayern was also a massive hit. But I wouldn't really say that was a huge reason for why they lost. Not to undertake of what Lohman does. I think her impact on the game is massive, and we saw that in the first game. But Bayern looked a little bit more disconnected. They looked like they were in panic mode almost. Unable to hold possession, unable to build from the back, falling really badly into Arsenal's press. And so not only did Arsenal have a great game, I thought, but from Bayern, it was a poorer display than usual. For Bayern, this is the second time they failed to move past the quarter stages in a row. Last year, it was PSG. This time, it was Arsenal. For Arsenal, they get into the semi-final stages, something that they haven't done in almost a decade. They also set a record for the most amount of attendance numbers in a Champions League game in England. Speaking of records, Barcelona and Roma set multiple records as well. First leg in Italy, Roma was able to hit the biggest attendance for an Italian women's soccer game. And for the second leg at Camp Nou, Barcelona were able to set over 50,000 people in attendance, which again is the third highest. In fact, the first three Barcelona hold, all of the three records I speak of, are all held at Camp Nou. I mean, isn't that just so crazy? They're selling out the Camp Nou and they're setting records at it. It's just so great to see. Very cool to see was also Vicky Losada, who now plays for Roma, play her first ever game at Camp Nou. Don't know, Vicky Losada arrived at Barcelona when she was 13. She has spent a majority of her career at Barcelona. In fact, she captained Barcelona when they won their first ever Champions League title. She is considered one of those Barcelona pioneers, but never actually got the chance to play at Camp Nou. So this time she did play at Camp Nou, but it was very much for Roma, not Barcelona. So it was a full circle for the Spanish player herself. Barcelona won that first leg 1-0, but you have to give it up for Roma. This is their debut season in the Champions League. Obviously, to make it into the quarterfinals within itself is just an accomplishment, and to then get matched up with Barcelona is definitely not the way you want to go about it. But they are so compact and they're so unorthodox and they've got so much dog in them. It is such a fun thing to see. Their goalkeeper, Cesar, I mean, the woman of the freaking tournament so far. That first game, I mean, I don't know how much her stock went up, but good lord, will a lot of teams be looking at her, because she was an absolute brick wall back there. And Barcelona that game did struggle in converting the ball into goals, but that wasn't just because of Roma had an outstanding goalkeeper, but you have to get up to their defending. I mean, again, they're so courageous. They get into the ball, they put their body in the line, and you have to say that was somewhat shaking up Barcelona, where it was like, are we going to get a second goal, or what's going to happen here? In those last 10 minutes, they came really, really close and had some very threatening shots. They came out particularly strong in that second half. Now, did they come out strong enough to really break Barcelona? Not necessarily. So for them to move away in that first leg 1-0, you've just set an attendance record, that's got to be a massive achievement, and kind of like a positive message of, you know what, you're on the right track. The club is doing exactly what they need to do to get to those, higher ceilings moving forward. Second leg at Camp Nou, and some of these Barcelona players, when you let them play at Camp Nou, I mean, it's just a different kind of world. And who I'm talking about is Carolina Graham-Hansen and Mappy Lyon. Mappy Lyon loves an absolute banger, pun intended, at the Camp Nou. The first ever game that they had at Camp Nou, the first ever goal scored at Camp Nou by a woman, was very much Mappy Lyon who scored it, and she did just another howler of a goal this game. Carolina Graham-Hansen has missed a significant amount of the season. Obviously, she had been out for injury. She's returned like she never even missed a step. Carolina Graham Hansen, her dribbling is so fast. She kind of explodes into those rushes out of nowhere. You know, she's kind of slowly building up the ball. She's kind of moving it a little bit, dribbling, and then all of a sudden she's accelerated so fast she's already gone around 3 different players. And that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, to be able to accelerate and be so explosive against fullbacks is a tough task, but it's a tough task because you have to able to obviously keep the ball with you and close enough to your body. But not only is she able to do that like it's nothing, she dribbles so smoothly with the ball. I mean, you watch Carolina Graham Hansen, I really think she turns into a different animal at Camp Nou. It was complete domination for the home side here, scoring 6 goals, conceding 1. But I think for Roma as well, what they did show is that even when there is a turnover or even when they are on a counterattack, they actually make something of a counterattack. Almost 86% of the turnovers that they got, they were able to generate an attacking ball moving forward. That's a very high number regardless of which team you're going up against. But to do that against Barcelona, it shows you that they are very threatening, and there is a reason that Barcelona maybe weren't able to score a ridiculous amount of goals in that first half. But ultimately, you can hold Barcelona maybe for a great 90 minutes. But to do that back-to-back in 2 legs, that's a really tough ask. Next up is PSG and Wolfsburg. Kind of a slightly underwhelming, actually, both legs for both teams. There was some questionable refereeing in the first half, which we will talk about at the end. First leg, Wolfsburg did move away with a 1-0 win. Quite underwhelming, more so underwhelming than I expected. PSG, however, did actually show up for the day and looked like they were having a very good 90 minutes throughout. They were hit by a red card and then they conceded this penalty. They were possibly should have been given a penalty. There is a lot of conversation in that first leg, and it's really hard to assess how both teams played or what the result really means when you've got faulty refereeing like this. But if you know one thing about PSG is that PSG can definitely turn it around. PSG can most definitely be losing in the first leg and just turn it around like nothing even happened in that second leg. And so going into the second leg, I don't think Wolfsburg were very confident that they're definitely in. They needed to show up and they needed to win. Similar story to PSG. PSG, however, did lose a few players throughout the week. They lose Jackie Groningen, who was an important player for that point. Defensive players also being out, you had to play Giora as one of your center back pairings. And I mean, you watch Giora, it looked like she was not out of position. It looked like that was her natural position. But when you have Giora out of position, it's not so much that you take a hit in the defense, but you take a massive hit in the midfield, her natural position. The conversation wasn't necessarily, oh, how are they going to deal in the back? PSG are going to have a shaky back line. It really wasn't that. It was more so that PSG are taking a hit in the middle. Jackie Groningen being out with the Giora playing out of position. You don't have many players in the middle. Speaking of injuries, Diani broke her collarbone and is out now for 6 weeks. Diani's playing out of position. She's playing as a striker. She's primarily a winger. However, she doesn't seem like she is necessarily. She's leading the Golden Boot in the French league. She is also sitting at 7 assists, which is just a ridiculous thing to be doing when you're out of position and when your team has lost a player like Katoto. To now lose kind of your final start, it was hard to see how PSG was going to somehow turn things around and put up a beating against Wolfsburg. Now, Alex Popp is going to Alex Popp. She's going to score goals out of nowhere. She started the attack. She finished the attack. Such a quality, experienced veteran that always, in my opinion, goes under the radar. Everybody knows how great Popp is. We talk about how great Popp is, but I think she still goes under the radar of how important she is in the press, how important she is in making sure that ball doesn't exceed a certain line of how Wolfsburg play. I mean, she's so good. Diani gets one in after 10 minutes. The game was still kind of up in the air. PSG was still able to apply some good pressure, specifically in the last 15 to 10 minutes. But Wolfsburg have massive midfield quality to deal with that, and they've also got massive attacking depth that they were not really going to struggle. And if this was going to go to extra time or whatever the situation was going to be, I think Wolfsburg looked equipped and they looked ready to be able to go out and beat PSG. Lastly, Lyon and Chelsea. I mean, that game had drama written all over it. From the first kick to the last penalty shootout, it was drama. First leg at Lyon, Chelsea able to beat Lyon with a beautiful right-in goal. Gura Wrighton, currently the assist leader at the WSL. Not only is she able to assist you some really great goals, she's also to score great goals of her own. However, that first leg definitely was not the best Chelsea appearance. I mean, probably their best appearance so far, but I wouldn't say it was a Chelsea masterclass or kind of that Chelsea, oh my god, absolutely terrified Lyon. But Lyon was very hesitant. Lyon did have the majority of the ball and they were able to move forward more than Chelsea did, but they looked hesitant. They looked like they were maybe a little bit too scared to actually pressure Chelsea. That dog aspect, that kind of like grit that I was talking about, I didn't watch that first game and was like, you know what? Lyon are really going to turn things around. If anything, it looked like Chelsea was actually moving forward more aggressively than Lyon did. They did lose Millie Bright in that first leg, which ultimately led her to stay out of that second leg as well. Lyon coming into the second leg, they were entering enemy territory. They've already had a very shaky, bumpy Champions League road already. They already lost to Arsenal. They already lost to Chelsea now. It hasn't been the smoothest sailing boat so far. It was a spell of different pressure between both teams. In fact, in that first half, it was exactly split possession between both of them, which really showed you how tight it was. But Lyon are also Lyon. This is their competition, and this is the competition that they have to win. This is the competition that we know them to win. This is a competition that's associated with the club, with the name, with, you think French football, you have to think Lyon in Champions League, and so you can underestimate them, but also Chelsea were looking bright at times, and ultimately they were leading this tie. It took 77 minutes for Vanessa Giles to get a goal and put them all equal, and it had to be a Canadian. I mean, as a Canadian myself, I also have to give it up for Giles. I thought she had a great game. Venti Renard and Giles, I thought, had a great game collectively together. In fact, I thought they gave Sam Kerr a lot of problems, keeping her frustrated at times. Giles aggressive when marking up Sam Kerr, not making any mistakes to give up a foul or possibly give a penalty. Very positionally aware of what Sam Kerr was going to do, where she was going to go, and really blocking every avenue that Sam Kerr was going to go to. So for Vanessa Giles, I thought she had a great game. For her to get a goal, it was like another plus for her. This was also her first Champions League goal. So for the Canadian, a great, massive occasion to do that. This is also a reminder that Canada and Australia are in the same World Cup group, so we are very much going to see more of Vanessa Giles and Sam Kerr, which I'm all for. Lauren James causing some crazy chaos, really making sure Endler was getting tested over and over again. Giles sends her team into extra time. We were going into deep waters. Extra time means you have to dig deep, you have to explore the depth, and you ultimately need to put the dog out. Chelsea already hit with a fair amount of injuries. They don't necessarily have a backup striker. They have Aston Villa coming up at the weekend. For them tired legs needed to be as untired as possible for the next 30 minutes. Sarah de Bruyne, the substitute, comes in on only her second game of the season, of the Champions League season, gets a goal in the 110th minute, and then I said Lauren James, and I said Lauren James chaos. Lauren James chaos got Chelsea a penalty at the final kick, at the final everything of the game. And who other than Maren Mjelde to finish it off. But what was ridiculous was that it took 6 minutes from when the foul occurred for the referee to review the VAR, for the referee to take the positioning of the players, to let them set up for the penalty. It took 6 agonizing minutes for that to be executed. For 6 minutes, I mean, if I was Maren Mjelde, I don't know how much money you'd have to pay me for me to be sitting there for 6 minutes waiting to take a penalty shot that was either going to push the game into penalty shootout, which means more penalties, or literally means I'm getting knocked out of the Champions League. I mean, just, you have to imagine the amount. I don't know. But she finished it. She buried it. Ice in her veins. Maren Mjelde, just like that, we're going to a penalty shootout. You cannot script it. She was also the first player to take the first penalty shootout. Lindsay Horan misses on the last penalty, and Chelsea are through. Chelsea have just beaten the reigning European champions, the champions of England, be the champions of France, to move through the semi-final stages of the competition. Ellie Carpenter is back. De Bruyne is back. At the Hagerberg we're also able to see. So for them, it wasn't necessarily that they're still struggling with those injury crisis that they were a few months ago. I'm not sure if they converted all their chances. There were definitely a lot of Chelsea blunders in the back that you have to take advantage of at this stage of the competition. It's a game of thin margins. Chelsea now move on to face Barcelona. This is going to be another massive game as well. It is also a repeat of the final from 2 years ago, like I previously mentioned. So let's talk about refereeing, officiating, and VAR. So every single game here did have VAR technology available. Not every single game had goal line technology, however. My stand on VAR is you can have the best technology, you can have the best VAR equipment available at you, but if you do not have the competent or the best trained officials that are making those final decisions, then the VAR becomes completely useless. If you roll that clip of the PSG Wolfsburg penalty call in front of the same referee that cancelled it about 10,000 times, likely she is going to also cancel it. If you hadn't rolled it, then she was also probably going to cancel it. So the discussion here isn't necessarily we need to have technology, we need to have VR. That obviously isn't expected yet. But if those individuals using that technology are not trained up to par and are not the ones taking the proper decisions, then what's the point of having that VAR? It actually becomes a loss because you're paying for it, you're paying for staff, you're paying for people to run this VAR, and then you've got these atrocious decisions. And atrocious is a harsh word, but some of these decisions throughout the entire quarterfinal stages were really, really poor. Some very clear bookings that should have happened and some very outrageous bookings that should have never happened. Bookings are very important. They can play some very important roles. You can have one of your most important players be not allowed to play the next game, and that could be the game changer. So yeah, bookings are a massive, important decision to make here. If you're making the wrong calls, you're making the wrong officiating decisions, that's poor. You can't have that at this stage of the competition. And I think our top level athletes also deserve a lot better than that. We haven't waited this long to have technology to get this result. We haven't advocated and invested this much money to get VAR for it to be kind of useless at the end because officials aren't able to use it properly. I actually really can't think of a game that I was like, you know what, officiating was very accurate and it was very good this game. Quite poor throughout every single leg. So something needs to be addressed, and definitely better training needs to be given for some of the officials running this. I want to hear your opinions on all this. Let me know which was your best game, which was your standout player across every single of these games, which team disappointed you, which team surprised you. There's a lot of conversation to be had about this, so share it all down below. As always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. All of these episodes are also free for you to access on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So, get listening.